Hvala lepa. Dobro jutro, dober dan tudi v imenu Ministrstva za izobraževanje, znanost in šport. Moram reči, da že po uvodnih nagovorih je kar nekaj stvari, na katere bi se človek želel referirati oziroma nekako diskutirati, ker mislim, da gremo vsi v isto smer, pa vendar, da nas kot v funkciji vodje panela se bom tega pač moral vzdržati, pa vendar nekaj poudarkov pa vseeno. Preden začnem, morda samo kratka predstavitev našega prvega gosta oziroma uvodničarja. Profesor René von Schomberg je specialist z področja znanstvenih in tehnoloških študij ter filozof. Je soavtor ali avtor več kot 14 monografij na Univerzi Twente na Nizozemskem, je doktoriral z področja znanstvenih in tehnoloških študij in pa na Goethe Univerzi v Frankfurtu na Majni, pa z področja filozofije. V letu 2007 je bil štipendist Evropske unije na George Mason University v ZDA, od leta 1998 pa sodeluje z Evropsko komisijo, z Direktoratom za raziskave in inovacije, ter je trenutno vodja skupine, ki se ukvarja z odprto znanostjo. But before we start, I would just like to say a few words about the open science in relation with our Ministry of Education, Science and Sport. First of all, we are all fully aware that open science will change the research and also policy environment, not only in Slovenia, but in Europe and also globally. And not only it's a great difference for researchers, it's a difference or the change of paradigm for users of research results, for policymakers, for financiers, also for public, and I would say for public perception of science, inclusion of public and so on into different processes. What we are doing relating to the open science in Slovenia, many things will be discussed today, many processes already started will be discussed as well, but from the point of view of the ministry, I would just like to say two important things. First of all, Slovenia was and still is a strong supporter of open science processes which are actually going on in the European level in the Council in relation to the Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020. The second thing which I believe is important to say is that Slovenia strongly supports open science also from the national perspective. We are at the moment in the process of preparing a new law related to science, to research, and open science is an important part of this document, and we believe that together with the research community we'll be able to finalize the proposal and adopt actually all the necessary framework conditions for full implementation of open science principles in Slovenia. Already mentioned at the beginning, there is an action plan related to open access and open access to the research publications and research data, and also action plan related to this. And as we follow the process in Slovenia, as Dr. Stančić said at the beginning, there are many challenges. There are many things which sees from large perspective as obstacles, but actually we believe at the ministry, together with the research community, that we are able to overcome these obstacles and actually do the research framework different as it is at the moment, and actually put science and research and innovation in the center of core activities, not only of researchers, but also of society. I will stop in this point, and actually I would like to introduce our guest to present us the open science concept and the open science perspective as developed and seen by the European Commission. And once again, thank you very much to all the organizers for organizing this excellent event, and looking forward for good results and actually fruitful discussion. Thank you. So the floor is yours. As already introduced, we have about half an hour for your introduction, and after that about 5 to 10 minutes for general questions, and actually I hope after that there will be a discussion during the coffee break. So please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be again in Slovenia. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you, Rector, for being here with us to discuss open science. I thank also Slovenia, of course, for the good support of open science policies. What I will do in the coming 30 minutes is to give, since, by the way, congratulations, 100 years anniversary. I will give also something of a history. It's not 100 years, but 10 years of open science policies, how they gradually evolved in Europe. So I will also start with why we actually do open science. It sounds a little bit strange, but I think it's good to make a step back sometimes and to see the overall rationale of what it's actually about. Now, let me see. So what is open science? I made a very short definition. There is no formal definition at the Commission or in Europe. But you can see this as the rationale. That's sharing data and knowledge as early as possible in open collaboration with all relevant knowledge actors. So this is actually a very short rationale. This is actually my definition. It's not supported by Juncker or something, but it does give the rationale of how we understand open science also at the European level. And if you look to this definition, which looks maybe simple, it has two components. First, it has the most visible aspect of it talks about open outputs of science, and this is where we discuss open access to policies, open access to publications, data, and so on. But one should also not forget that there is an input for open science. This is a little bit under-highlighted in the current discussion, and that's about how we actually use knowledge in the research process. And as the definition actually already says, open science and action is very often sharing data and knowledge prior to publication. In a certain way, although we talk a lot about open access nowadays to publications, open science actually relativizes the importance of publications, because there are other open outputs of science, other dimensions of science which become important, and this opens a whole new spectrum on which we are now actually in the middle of discussion. It leads to discussions on other ways of research assessment, other ways of rewarding scientific activities as such. So this is why I just made a step back to put this on the forefront. Now, this is actually also the concept we used in 2014, it was, when we were challenged in the House why actually we want open science. What is now so good about open science? And I got three arguments. First, the analysis is that open science will make science more efficient. Why is that? Because if you work in an open environment, you can share your resources, you identify research projects of other people which you actually planned yourself, so in a certain way it avoids duplication of research, it becomes more traceable what you do, and you can share it with others, and you can share your resources, so in the end science as a system becomes more efficient. The other argument is that science, and this is not an unimportant issue nowadays, a lot talk about that science is in crisis because our data are not reproducible. You know, the former editor of Nature one time told me that 60% of the articles published in Nature have data underlying which cannot be reproduced by others. So this looks, if you take it one step back and think, okay, I have only a high school education of science, then you would think, well, they only publish crap, because if you can reproduce it, it's then science. Okay, it's not like that, but there is an issue here. And of course, open science will make science more reliable because it provides better verification if you do it in an open environment, and there are more scientists engaged in this verification process. Now, the third argument is that, and this is of course one of the topics of our framework program of the Commission, trying to address science, trying to address the societal challenges like food security, climate change, etc. with science, and making science, in other words, more responsive to societal challenges. This is also something which you can expect, that a more open science will become more responsive to those societal demands, less to internal scientific affairs. So these were three major arguments. Of course, there are also other arguments for our open science, but then we had the problem we could not prove it. It's just a logical argument. And this is why we set up a public consultation to share this diagnosis across Europe with all stakeholders, organizations, scientists. And actually, in that process, we got a sort of confirmation that this diagnosis that we should do open science for those reasons is a good justification for doing open science. Now, what this now means is that we, after this public consultation, we set up a European, what we call now a European open science agenda, which actually had 5 policy lines. And these 5 were, one was on open access to publications and data. The second one was changing the rewards in its incentive system. The third was infrastructure. We had to have more open infrastructures. This is now translated into what you probably now are aware of the European Open Science Cloud. And then we had some other issues relating to science, so open science, making it more embedded in the societal context, and analyzing the research assessment context of open science. Now, I will, on these 5 policy lines, eventually, in 2015, we got 8 policy priorities, which were the so-called 8 open science ambitions of our Commissioner Matjaž, who took office in 2015. Now, the first 4 of these 8 policy priorities, derived from this European Open Science Policy Agenda, are related to the use and management of research results. First is to have an agenda for what we call now fair data. So making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So secondly, the European Open Science Cloud. As I mentioned, it was a large majority of our stakeholders really called for a more open data infrastructure. Third, we need alternative indicators. The current system, it was already referred to in the introduction. The journal impact factor is jeopardizing open science activities. It does not reflect the real merit and the quality of research done. And fourth, we wanted to have an outlook on how scholarly communication would evolve till 2030. So these were the 4 priorities around the use and management of research. We had also 4 priorities which relates to aligning the research partners. I think the most important and now the most difficult one to tackle and still high on the agenda now is changing the rewards and incentive system. I will come back to that in detail later. And then we have 3 other issues. science skills. There's a lot of open science, especially in the data, as open science is also encompassing a ever more data-driven science. We need more skills in education around open science, and universities need to develop curricula to respond to the ever-growing demand of having more data scientists available. Now, citizen science is also an important topic. It will be more dominant in the next framework program, Horizon Europe, where we try to involve citizens actively in research or try to involve them in setting research agendas. In other words, to acknowledge that even citizens or other knowledge producers can produce quality knowledge and has to be acknowledged as such. So these are the 8 priorities we had back in 2015, on which we made step-for-step progress over the last years. I will give a very short overview now where we are, and then I will dive into the 8 priorities. So on open access, there we have already a long history. In fact, we started with it when it comes to publications already back in 2008. But in 2014, with the program Horizon 2020, open access became mandatory. And in 2016, the European Council adopted a policy objective to have immediate open access by 2020 in Europe. So that also became a basis for our former Directorate-General to launch Plan S. And what we also currently have in mind is actually to open an open research platform for the Commission to enable scientists who participate in our framework program to publish their preprints online, etc. So to provide an open environment for research publications. Now, for open data, it started a little bit later. Open data became a default option in 2017, but in the new framework program, it will also be mandatory in association with having the data in the form of fair data as far as possible. Now, the European Open Science Cloud, I already mentioned, we started immediately after the consultation with an initiative under the Digital Single Market. The European Open Science Cloud was launched last year, already in 2018. The Commission has done, so to speak, its work on that. It's now more in the hands of member states who have to take this over, this initiative, and make it work in Europe. Okay, so on indicators, we are still in the very initial phase, because everybody knows that we want to have other indicators, but nobody knows exactly what the others then are. This is a very shortcut of the discussion at the moment, but I think that's not unfair to say. For citizen science, we make advances, notably in a new framework program, to have it as a rewardable practice. And we have established what we call the European Open Science Policy Platform in 2016. And this platform is a platform of 25 major European stakeholders. There are 5 university associations in it. There are research organizations in it, library organizations, publishers, and so on, with the idea that open science, when it evolves, it has to be supported by all these stakeholders in a mutual responsive way. I mean, the publishers have to respond to what the universities do if they change their research assessment system. Funders have to adapt, will make changes to make open science more fundable. And you know, so all these stakeholders, of course, have to react to each other and have to ideally have a basis on the core principles of open science to make open science work. So we started with that in 2016. The platform made its recommendations 2 years later at the May Competitiveness Council in last year. And now we are actually in the stage to work with the stakeholders to alternative rewards and incentive system. This is a very difficult process, so this goes, of course, much slower than one would hope, but I think this is the only way to do it. This is the platform now in a nutshell. So, as I said, the major challenge is now changing the rewards and incentive system. You can see from the early examples we have that it matters quite a lot. For example, the University of Liège in Belgium made already a couple of years ago it mandatory for all its researchers to put the publications they make at the university available in an open repository. And that would, if they would not do that, then they would not be entitled to promotion. And if you do such a thing, then you see immediately that the researchers now at that university are completely at ease with it, but then publications in Nature and so on becomes immediately less important. You see, so if universities take the step to change the reward system, it immediately has an impact on the other actors in the field. And you see it as a nice example of how open science actually effectively can evolve. Now, this is the type of stuff we will be working on in the coming years. Now, fair data. So now the 8 priorities in a short fashion. I'm aware of the 30 minutes, so please warn me where I am. I'm not there with one of your. Okay, so when it comes to fair data, you know, the main achievements are, of course, that the launch of the European Open Science Cloud already last year in November under the Austrian presidency. And now we are more in an implementation phase. We have Ingrid with us, who is coordinator of a project. This is one of the things, of course, we had to launch under our current program, already starting a couple of years ago, a number of projects which were either pilots for the cloud or to work on particular elements of the cloud. One issue which is very important is, of course, how to develop fair data. So this is all in our program. It's now in an implementation phase. It's now, of course, in the hands of people who has to do it. So the European Open Science Cloud, I already mentioned in detail. I will not go in more detail than that right now. So on indicators, we have produced, in most of the cases of these 8 priorities, by the way, we have produced expert group reports. These are 2 expert groups I have been managed the last few years on indicators. We initially had a report on what was that called all metrics, but we soon discovered that any metrics you have is actually problematic. To make it actually sure that if you want to measure something for such like research quality or excellence, then you always measure something else. You don't measure quality directly. It's actually not possible to do that. So there was very quickly also a call, and I think this is more or less now the consensus in the field, that we should have a qualitative assessment in association maybe with quantitative indicators, but it can never be exclusively quantitative. A second expert group report, which is about to appear on our website, I think it will be out mid-June, which has a more detailed approach on how we can develop indicators which are specific for supporting open science activities. The problem which we face here is that indicators for one discipline is not the same as for others. For the historians or for biochemists, you cannot use the same indicators. So they have tried to take this into account. And most of all, if you use indicators and you don't have an open data infrastructure, your indicators are always bad. So we have to be reflexive about this. And we have to work in a context where data are not open. Most of the data are proprietary, and they can only be accessed, if you pay for it. So this means that we still have to work forward in such a context. Ultimately, when we have a European Open Science Cloud and our data infrastructure is open, then also our research assessment and indicators will become better and more reliable. Now, on open access, for the Commission, open access is actually an old thing, since for us this was already mandatory since long. Our ex-Director-General, Robert Jan Smits, thought, well, I mean, it's not, Commission leading by example is not sufficient, we have to give it a push. So he proposed this Plan S, which was then launched by, as already mentioned in the introduction, by Science Europe, in association with now 15 research councils, if I have the number correctly in my head, and there are also some private charities which have joined the initiative, like the Bill Gates Foundation and Wellcome Trust. That initiative is, although it was proposed by Robert Jan Smits as an advisor, it's not a Commission initiative. And one should see that it's an initiative of those councils, coordinated by Science Europe. And what they propose is very much what the Commission already long had in place, and what also for Horizon Europe is already prepared. So in the end, Commission is not part of Plan S, but is a supporter of Plan S, and obviously we will align with it. So rewards and skills. I think we desperately need another rewards and incentive system for science. Currently, if people want to engage with open science, it can be bad for their career. If you ask a scientist, look, you have wonderful data there, don't you think it's good for the scientific system to share your data immediately? Then the scientist would say, yes, that's a very good idea. And then if you ask, are you going to do it? And they say, no, I'm not going to do it because I first want to publish it. And this will take some time. So this is the dilemma, especially for young scientists. It will be a challenge because it's for the sake of science better to share, but in the sake of your career, it's better not to do it. If you have this dilemma, then obviously, if I would be a young scientist, then I would also not do it. I'm a proponent of open science, but it jeopardizes your career. So this is where we are right now, and this is what needs a desperate change if we want to make science really better. So on research integrity, this is an issue which has been already addressed by ALEA, which is a consortium of academies of science around the world, and especially in Europe this has been translated as an obligation in the grant agreement. And this has taken actually a long time. I think these people have been busy 20 years to develop a European Code of Conduct. But even if it takes long, open science was not really, it's touched upon, but it's not really aligned with it. So we hope actually to have a further elaboration on it in terms of how research integrity in a much broader context of open science can be understood. So where issues like reproducibility and so on will also be taken into account. Okay, so citizen science, I already mentioned it. The sort of objective is just to make citizen science, where science is done by citizens, also a rewardable and fundable practice. We have, and this may be for those who are new to the subject matter, an interesting instrument to look at. We have on our website a so-called Open Science Monitor. It gives you some quantitative data on how the different policies and also the different dimensions of open science have developed over time. So how many publications appear in open access, how many data has been shared, how many researchers work in open collaborative networks, and so on. And there you can also already see that there has been quite exponential rise in doing open science over a couple of years. But currently, the curve is going to flatten a little bit. And why is that? That's, of course, the rewards and incentive system. Because the scientists themselves are very often motivated to do open science. Sometimes open science is a necessity in certain subject matters. But in many cases, it brings you into this dilemma I was talking about. And as long as that's not addressed, we will not get the curve again rising. So that I think is the bottleneck. I think this you can see very well from the monitor. So we have also worked on bringing open science at the global level. So thank you. So I will stay within those 5 minutes. So we have brought it on the global level, notably at the G7 and G20. Statements on open science have been adopted, notably on developing open infrastructures worldwide and on open access. So OECD, same story, so I can stay within the 5 minutes. So let me go to wrap it up a little bit. So I mentioned this already. I think these are now to give you just an outlook on the new framework program, Horizon Europe. You will see that so the new framework actually clarifies and empowers authors more than before. One of the elements is that, of course, the copyright retention remains with the author. This is foreseen in Horizon Europe. This is actually also one of the principles of Plan S. But as I said already before, the Commission already prior to Plan S had these principles set into motion. So this is for us independent of Plan S. So we also want, and that's probably new, we had open access already as mandatory since 2014, but there was no enforcement mechanism. What do you do if people don't comply? So in this case, for the new framework program, people will be threatened with sanctions. We don't like to threaten people. I think open science should be a natural process, but we have decided nonetheless to do this in an exceptional case as it becomes necessary. So to keep, as I said, this is sort of the outlook. This is a sort of scenario on Plan S, if I come back to it. And to conclude with it, there has been a consultation on the so-called 10 principles of Plan S. That consultation was ended, I think, last week, 15 May. There are the results on how Plan S will now look and revise is known to me, but it's not open yet. It's on embargo till the end of the month, and so actually only 10 days from now. But this is actually a likely scenario how Plan S will evolve in terms of Horizon Europe, and so that hybrid journals, for example, will be allowed. However, that the cost will not be eligible, because we think that hybrid journals actually don't align with the principles of open access as they should. And that open licenses, so preferably the CC BY licenses, will be adopted. I think this is a fair scenario which I can sketch. So I think I will leave it by that. I hope this was still remain within the time limits, and I give the floor for the chair.
Thank you very much.
And look forward to the discussion.
We have about 5 to 10 minutes for immediate questions. I would like to invite all of you to ask our guest. So who will start?
To break the ice, I'm interested in the alternative metrics which you mentioned. If I understood correctly, there are some working groups working on these metrics. Can you say something more concretely about what are the approaches they are taking? So what is the alternative to the metrics that we have now?
Yes. Maybe I should take that microphone. So, because then I can move more freely. I feel I'm freeze there at this desk. So, well, yes, this is found to be a quite difficult topic in terms of finding a solution. I mean, first of all, I think there is quite. Let me just rephrase what, on the basis of these expert group reports, has become sort of consensual among stakeholders. One principle is that if we go to an alternative system, the indicators or the metrics should be both quantitative and qualitative. That's one thing. The second one is that we need a discipline-specific approach in many cases. It's not possible to produce, let's say, a generic indicator. So if I, for instance, in my naiveness, I was thinking a couple of years ago, why we cannot make the indicator how much data is shared and reused. Can we not use this as an indicator, for example? Because that seemed to me makes sense, and you can see how open science evolved in that context. But then a lot of people start protest. No, but because we historians, you cannot say that, and this is not relevant. And in some disciplines, you need to reuse and produce much more data than in other disciplines, and so So in other words, so the arguments I now give and the difficulties I give, for any indicator you produce, you will get such a discussion. So in other words, we need a discipline-specific, or maybe not discipline-specific, but research activity-specific approach. And this is what the second expert group has done. The report is not yet out, but it will be online. Of course, all the results are open, and I'm most... you can send me an email. I can also send the reports directly to you. But I produced actually a model for evaluating and also specific for open science different activities, whether it's mission-oriented research, whether it's qualitative research, whether it's done in particular institutions, and then provide particular toolboxes and indicators specific for that context to be used. So that's a sort of outline. Now one has to still they did not want to go very far in making very concrete indicators because of the fact that we don't have a really open data infrastructure. So all the information you have to make an indicator is always necessarily fragmented. So also in our open science monitor, we use indicators, but we know it's not complete. But that's the best what we can do right now. So this is the direction where it will go. But we are not there yet in terms of real solutions. I think some universities, for instance, in the country where I originate from, the Netherlands, they have decided, I think last year, to do away with bibliometrics as such. It does not appear anymore in the research evaluation protocol. Some other university in Belgium, like University of Ghent, for example, recently has decided to use only a qualitative assessment of their researches to assess them and to make promotions dependable on that. So their data wave indicators all over the board. They also don't want to develop new ones. So you will see that, and I think this is also not an unlikely scenario, that there is now a reaction against all the bad things which are out there, like Juno impact factor and so on, that given the difficulties to have something really alternative, you may have quite a diversity among, since the universities are relatively autonomous in doing these things, to develop their own initiatives, which is an improvement over what we now have. And so like the University of Ghent and Liège are examples of that, I think.
Thank you. We still have time for 1 or 2 questions. So, please.
Hi, hello. My name is Miro Pushnik, coming from CTK, Central Technological Library, the University of Ljubljana. My question is regarding, let's say, European Commission in relation to publishers in now upcoming Horizon Europe. Can we expect some more, let's say, formally intensive role of European Commission regarding negotiating with publishers? Because in current situation we have, let's say, very strictly requirements, however, smaller countries struggling to achieve them. And the second question is about the tax law. We've been told about those, let's say, Google punishment by European Commission due to monopoly of in the market. Here is, I think, the same monopoly. What is your opinion about that?
Well, I must say that the European Commission is in itself as an institution not on a negotiation table with publishers. Can you all hear me actually, or because it says an echo? Okay, so the deals which have been made, that is normally always an engagement of universities with publishers. And of course there are initiatives to make these deals more effective by going at the European level, or to have countries who have made successful deals to inform other countries on how to proceed with that. But this is not where the Commission as an institution interferes in. But maybe if I take your question also as an opportunity to be a little bit reflective on what it actually means to go into these negotiations, because what is the pressure or what is the necessity for publishers to change their model? Now, the publishers will only change their model if universities change their reward system. If the universities don't do that, then the publishers can go on with their business. Then complaining about the costs is a little bit strange as a university, because it's also it's in your hands. So in that sense, if you cannot say, okay, we don't change the reward system and then complain about the costs. No, I mean you can also say, well, we make our own online publishing platform, and then bye-bye a publisher. You can do it. So, but okay, this is not, again, I just say this as a personal reflection, it's not something where the Commission engages in as an institution. But I do think that, that as you look to the market, of course, there has been alternative business models developed for accommodating open access, and in various ways. Also in various ways on publishing, and I think also in the wider context how we have to change our review system, for instance. There are also different models associated by different publishers, so there is a diversity coming up, which I think is a good thing. We personally, I think, and we need to change our rewards and system, and then the publishers will come along. And then you don't need to do all these difficult deals anymore.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just informed that we are out of time. In about less than 1 hour we have a coffee break, so it's good to be punctual. Thank you very much to our guests for the excellent presentation.